Good day, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to African Scholar Corner. Today, I'm so excited because I'm having a sitting with one of the giants of Africa, Professor Thobejane, an intellectual. And what makes me excited is that he's also an activist. So he'll be better prepared to answer some of the difficult questions that has to do with politics. Prof, welcome to Africa Scholar Corner.
Oh, thank you, Prof. And good morning or good afternoon to all the viewers. And I'm very excited to be part of this engaging program.
Thank you, Prof. Hey, you know, Africa is in trouble. We need the brain power, thinking capacity, intellectuals to come out of the closet. And thank you for being available for the continent, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
To begin with, who is Professor Thobejane?
Well, I don't know where to start, but Professor Thobejane presently works as coordinator for, we used to call it the Institute for Youth and Gender Studies, but now we have sort of disintegrated. We have a unit within the Department of Youth in Development called Gender Studies. So I'm coordinating the Gender Studies unit, and the objective or the mission of the unit is to make sure that we produce a lot of students who ultimately will be better equipped to fight issues of gender-based violence. And we talk of gender mainstreaming because of patriarchal relations in the country. We saw it fit that we should have a unit which addresses issues of gender, especially gender mainstreaming, so that those ladies or our mothers or our sisters who are marginalized or who have been historically marginalized from the socio-economic development of South Africa can also be brought forth into the economic mainstream. So that's basically what I'm doing.
Okay.
And besides that, I mean, I'm a researcher, and my research is based on the economy, is based on education in South Africa, and also on issues of gender, as I've alluded to earlier. I was born somewhere in 1962. I'm a dinosaur, and I'm proud of that because it comes with wisdom. Some sort of wisdom. I know I've lost a lot of friends along the way. And if you want me to continue with my education and so on, I can, with your permission.
Yes, briefly, Prof. I'm particularly interested in the beginning, where it all started, the primary schools, the people who molded this professor that we see in front of us.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah. My early schooling, let me put it that way. I attended school at a lower primary school called Makwelering Lower Primary School. That is a township in Mokopane. That's where I did my grade R until those of you who are as old as me will remember that we used to have forms. Yes, Form 1, Form 2, Form 3 in that school. Then I moved over to Gojela High School somewhere in the 70s, where I did my Form 3, Form 4, and Form 5, which is it grade 12 or yes,
Yeah.
grade 12. That's where I finished my grade 12. It's still in Makwelering. Then I moved over to do my diploma in teaching.
Sorry, Prof. Before we leave that formative schooling, are there people who could be credited in shaping your thinking as in that early stage?
Oh yes, Prof. Well, first of all, my parents, Fati Thobejane, who is my mother, and Mirika Thobejane, who's my father, they're both late, but because they loved education, they really pushed me. And the other people who encouraged me when my parents died at an earlier age, I think I was still in Form 3, which is grade 8. My sisters took over the role of parenting me. That's Rivoni Thobejane and Tebogo Thobejane. Then my brother also joined, Mangope Thobejane, who's now late. They all molded me. But this Mangope Thobejane, I'm going to accuse him for bringing me into politics. Maybe that's a question to be answered later on. Yeah, because he was in the Black Consciousness movement at that time when I was still at high school. You might remember that when there was a political lull in the 50s, the Black Consciousness movement took over and politicized and conscientized a lot of people. Now, Makwelering was said to be the hub of the Azanian People's Organization, and the first state of emergency, which was incepted somewhere in 1979-81, the victims thereof, many of them are from Makwelering. So my brother is amongst those who were detained under the first state of emergency and sent to Portsmouth prison somewhere in the 80s, together with Dr. Farisani and the others. So you can see the influence he had on me and how I continue to accuse him. Had it not been of him, probably I would still be, I don't know, a reactionary professor or somebody who yeah, but that's now beside the family, we've had people in the township like Ntate Maila, may his soul rest in peace, who was our teacher when I was doing grade 8. And then we've had others like Ntate Kekana, we had Ntate Sijiko, and our principals like Mr. Moholwa, and who married one of Lekhanyani's daughters. And I think the sister also works at the University of Venda. So these are the people.
You mean the bishop?
Yes, the bishop. Yeah, the bishop of
one of the biggest churches in
one of the biggest churches called ZCC in South Africa. So he married one of the daughters, and he loved education, and he instilled within us that love, so that we can be able to separate wheat from chaff and darkness, light from darkness. And we also had, in my earlier ages, I think you may recall that Professor or Dr. Msibudi Mangena was also under house arrest in Makwelering when we were young, at the age of 14, 15. This was a young man who was just released from Robben Island after spending 5 years, and he was banished to our area.
Mm.
And I think at that time the system thought that Makwelering is a tiny township, and banishing him there would mean that they were going to silence him forever. But then he came to the township, and he was banished in one of the houses which was in my street.
Mm.
So because he was a mathematician, he every now and then he would violate his banning orders and call us into his house to teach us mathematics and a little bit of physics, what you call biology, and at that time it was science. I don't know what it is called now, life sciences. So he was a role model to many of us, and he instilled a sense of love in as far as education is concerned. So that's one of the people that I really admire too much and cherish, and give all those accolades to.
Are we talking about Dr. Manyena, who was once the Minister of Science and Technology for the country?
Yes, yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, he was also the president of ASAPO, isn't it?
Yes, he's still the honorary president as we speak.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's him, Prof. And because he's a scientist by profession, I think he did his undergraduate. He did mathematics even at a higher level. I think he obtained his master's at UNISA when he was in prison, when he was still under house arrest. So, but he still had time to nurture and teach some of us who fell in love with the subject mathematics. Though I dropped it at some stage because I think it was not in my blood. So I did something. I did something else which fulfilled me. But those are the people who actually shaped my youth and made me into to become who I am. Another person is called Mutsibi Kekana from Makwelering also. He was also a very strong activist in the 70s and 80s, and he also loved books. So every Friday we would have we had a book club. So every Friday we would read books like Ngugi wa Thiong'o's book and Kwame Nkrumah, and we would give some lectures. Mind you, we were in grade 12 at that time. So we had started reading a lot of books that were really engaging, so that we could understand what South Africa was going through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then your schooling briefly, where did you study tertiary, your tertiary education?
Well, I after my matriculation, I went to Mukopane College of Education and did my diploma. I studied for my teaching diploma. I'm also a teacher by profession. Okay. Though my certificate at some stage, it was renounced by the South African government so that I shouldn't be able to teach. Yeah. But that and then later on, I went to the US. Remember, I was an activist also. I don't know if I should touch that part or we will talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later when we discuss the nexus between academy and the political life of our people.
Okay, Prof. Yeah. So I went to the US under there was a program. It was a leadership program that was intended for all those people who were activists within liberation movements. We're talking about AZAPO, PAC, and the ANC. So in the 80s, there was a transitional period that was looming then, just before the advent of democracy. So most of us were taken to the US, and we were given some kind of scholarships by, it was called Creative Associates. It's an organization that was formed by the White House, so to say, the government, the US government, to train people in as far as leadership is concerned, so that when we come back, we can be able to prepare for democracy. So the program was an 8-month internship on leadership. So in South Africa, it's an equivalent of what we call maybe a diploma in public administration. So I've done that. Then later on, I came back home, and after maybe 8 months, I went back to the US, and I will tell you why I did that later on. But I went to the US to pursue my master's in what we call development economics, which is a little bit different from your hardcore economics, because my profession was looking at developing economic incubators, especially within marginalized communities, to build business incubators so as to uplift the standard of life of our people. And I deliberately took that master's degree, having South Africa at the back of my mind when I was enrolling for it, thinking about villages, townships, and how marginalized we were economically. So I did my master's degree in development economics. That's at the University of Massachusetts. I'm sorry, that's Manchester University, which is a little bit far from the main. When we talk of the US, it's divided into a lot of regions. But Manchester is somewhere in New Hampshire State. That's where I did my master's. Then thereafter, I moved to Boston, where I did my PhD in international education, also having at the back of my mind the state of education in South Africa. Remember, at that time, we were transiting from Bantu education to people's education. So the focus there was to learn different curricula that were offered to different curricula in different countries, studying curricula issues in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, in the US, in Canada, and in Africa, and see which one can really facilitate what you may call people's education for economic development. So it was quite interesting. I finished my PhD in 2004, then worked for an organization called Center for International Learning, and it's based in Brattleboro, in the US, not far from Canada. But then this organization had some satellites all over the world. So I was employed there, and I was sort of deployed in South Africa, in my country, which made me a little bit happier, because then I was able to come home and be with my people while working at the same time, maintaining my dual status of some sort. Yeah, so it helped, because eventually I came back home. The other educational endeavor that I think was very helpful, in the 80s, there was what we call Welgespreid. Fellowship Center. It was based in Joburg.
Mm.
It was also offering training for political activists, and also offering counseling. And this institution was sponsored by, I think it's called Antigonish University somewhere in Canada. And we have had some of the professors here at Univen coming once in a while to lecture us there on issues of, and we also had people who were trade unionists like Nefolo Vodwe coming to lecture us on issues of trade unionism. So that too, it's a diploma because it was I think a 9-month program, an intensive program, and after that we would be deployed into various organizations in the country, depending on which skills you wanted. If you wanted skills on accounting, if you wanted skills on maybe just leadership generally, or trade unionism, or collective bargaining, and so on and so forth, you would get that kind of a skill. So in a nutshell, that's my educational background. Sometimes it's difficult to talk about that and not really alluding to what really gave me the impetus to to study forward.
Yeah, in the context.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, hey, thank you so much. I thought I knew you. Right, Prof.
You know me, Prof.
Yeah, let me ask you these questions. The idea is to make people like yourselves accessible to a wider audience or wider viewership who may understand the meaning of a professor. They just hear me saying Professor Thobejane. What does it take for one to be what you are, to become a professor?
Well, thanks for that question. I wouldn't say it takes guts, it takes this, it takes that, because sometimes when you are passionate about something, when you are passionate about research or about knowledge creation, it comes naturally to you. And when you are promoted to become a professor, it's not like a big deal, because you are continuing with what your ancestors gave you to create knowledge for the sake of the development of your people. But in a hostile environment where there's competition and so on, I would say that, of course, you have to write articles, you have to produce and write articles and make sure that your articles are written in a journal that is accredited. And now, if you are churning out a lot of knowledge in that area, then your university will acknowledge the contributions you made in the area, in your niche area. Then you can be given that promotion. You can become a professor. But you will realize that you have edited some of my works, Prof, and we have been doing that not because of promotion per se, but because we wanted to produce some kind of knowledge to our people. We wanted to, the second book that you edited is called The Fight for an Egalitarian Society, which is more political but educative at the same time, which had to do with issues of Black consciousness, issues of racism in the country, issues, yes, and issues of patriarchy and so on. The idea was to come up with knowledge which can benefit our people. And the other articles that I wrote, which you co-edited, were in the area of development as well, education, musicology, and so on. So when you are in love with education, some of the things just come as second nature. And that's how ultimately I was recognized for my writings, and I was, promoted to the position of professor in gender studies.
And then that journey, does it entail also supervision and mentoring?
Definitely. Well, in the classical sense, you have to maybe publish in what we call peer-reviewed journals. That's the first thing. And depending on which university you are working for, you may produce 4 or 5. Some of us, some of our universities need like 10 or 15 or 20 articles before you can become a professor. That's a long journey. Whereas some universities, if you produce just one article and you become a household name in as far as that article is concerned, why not? You can become a professor, and thereafter you have to have at least your masters and your PhD students that you are supervising, you are mentoring, and when they graduate, depending on how many they are, they actually give you the impetus, or for a university to promote you. In most instances, some universities may need 4 or 5 master students, and some may need plus maybe 4 or 5 PhD students. I'm talking about those things lightly, but to produce one master's or one PhD student, it takes a lot, a lot of mentoring, a lot of research, and just one PhD student really makes you feel worn out at the end of the day. But let's not take being a professor lightly, because I'm talking about it now because I'm now promoted. I feel like, well, let me make it lightly and simpler to others so that they shouldn't think it's difficult.
It's attainable.
Yes, it's attainable.
But then also being a professor means there's a unique contribution that you would have made to scholarship. That is besides the number of publications and the number of students you've graduated. What theoretical light have you switched on to academy that we could follow if we want to think or see the world the way Professor Thobejane does?
Yeah, well, the ideal world that I need, Prof, that I aspire to, is that of an egalitarian society. Now, when we talk egalitarianism, we talk a society devoid of class oppression, exploitation, and democracy, anti-racism, anti-ethnicity, and a society that is devoid of gender-based violence. So my research revolves around those notions, because ultimately that's where South Africa can prosper as a country, or that is where ultimately the world can prosper. Unfortunately, we are still, hung up or dug into our little enclaves. Ethnicity is still running rampant in the country. In South Africa, for instance. In other countries, you have racism still running rampant. In the US, You know of the Black Lives Matter movement. You know of in Germany where some of, and even in Ukraine, can you imagine people fleeing war, but they are still having the audacity to say, well, because we are white, let's jump into trains first and blacks will be catered for. I'm talking about those who are running from the war in Ukraine, and because they are white, they still think they should be the first ones to be helped, and some of our people should be held backwards. So these are the areas that really propel me to do research and write a lot. And the other theory that really it's about Pan-Africanism. Having read a lot about Steve Biko, having read a lot about Kwame Nkrumah and Stokely Carmichael and Amilcar Cabral, Frantz Fanon, they pricked my interest in as far as social engineering is concerned and how we can usher in a world that is better suited for all of us. So my writings and research is actually along those areas. And as a political activist, I drew a lot of inspiration from people like those, Thomas Sankara, Frantz Fanon, you name it.
Interesting. It's interesting that you are not mentioning any of the current intellectuals. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, maybe because I'm old also, but I'm reading a lot of interesting books by yourselves, and you have edited a very good book on African epistemologies, and I think that is very recent, where I've contributed a chapter there, I'm also, I just finished reading a book by Ntate Musibudu Mangena, Dr. Mangena, and I have also, I'm reading a lot of articles, especially in journals these days,
Okay.
written by African scholars. So in a nutshell, those are my people. They really encourage me.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the quagmire in Ukraine.
Yes.
There's something that is currently happening, which is confusing a lot of people. And I think it calls upon people like yourselves to try and demystify. There are several African leaders, presidents to be precise, who seems to be aligning themselves with Pan-Africanism. Yes. I cite President Kagame, Mbeki, and many others. Now, with the passing of Queen Elizabeth, a lot of Africans on the ground do not really give a hoot about that occasion, because they are still aggrieved and they still accuse her of being a chief pillager of African resources. Now, it's confusing if the leaders of the continent are silent about it, but instead they are hosting the flag half-mast. It is really confusing.
Yeah.
How do you explain this to a confused soul like myself?
Well, thanks for that beautiful question, Prof. I think, and yet we are called, South Africa is one of the countries called Commonwealth countries, is it? We are part of the Commonwealth. Now, if you are part of the Commonwealth, the term Commonwealth, when you the epistemology or the where it started and so on, it's the British Empire conquering other countries for the common wealth of its success, its survival as an empire. So now you have African leaders who feel proud that they are part of the Commonwealth. So they haven't really demystified the terminology itself. When you say you are part of the Commonwealth and you are proud, you will have a passport.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, you are saying that you are part of that larger scheme of colonialism, where your wealth as a country would be thrown into that basket of the imperialist who holds the basket of the Commonwealth. That is, if you want to sort of analyze the word Commonwealth. But now let me go back to your beautiful question. We are at the crossroads presently, where some of our leaders are actually just mere what in Marxist terms, we would call the comprada bourgeoisie. Now, if you are a comprada, it means you have been put in place to serve the master rather than to serve your people. We say colonialism, we have some countries that are saying that they fought colonialism successfully. But then when the colonial master left, especially in Africa, they put some of their own compradas, the comprada bourgeoisie, the person who will take care of the master's house when the master is away. That is why we have neo-colonialist settlements in most of the African countries. And no wonder that most of them are actually still worshipping the Queen and Britain and so forth, because the master has not totally left. The master is still in Africa, basically, and this comprada bourgeois, who happens to be a leader in the African context, is still obeys by the rules. So now you look at South Africa every 4 years after elections. It has become a tradition the new leader has to go to Britain to actually show to the Queen, now that she's gone, probably it will be going to show to Charles that, well, I'm the new leader of South Africa. As part of the Commonwealth, I have come to pledge my services once more. So it happens every 4 years, and even Mandela did that, Mbeki did that. So the tradition continues, and I don't know, maybe our new leader in 2024 may totally break free from those colonial constraints. I don't know, but because we are a Commonwealth, hey, maybe it will still continue. Your question was fully loaded. You started off by also talking about the war in Ukraine. Now, it brings to mind what we call NATO expansionism. NATO is non-aligned, all the countries, especially of the West, forming an alliance so that for me, so that they can plunder and pillage the riches of other countries. Now, the Ukraine or the Russian-Ukraine war should be seen in that context, where Putin has actually drew the line on the sand and said, no, you cannot expand into my country under the guise of Ukraine development and so on and so forth. So that's where the war is at the present moment. Now, as Africans, should we be worried? Yes, we are, because I'm told that Ukraine is the basket of the world in as far as food is concerned. Maybe because there's no grain, nothing. Somalia is really in dire straits when it comes to food. I'm saying that maybe it's a blessing in disguise, so that Africa can totally, at this time, can totally be free and be self-sufficient, create its own food, create its own energy, and make sure that we look inward as a continent rather than, depend on the forces from outside. I'm going to leave it at that, but I think it's a fully loaded question, and research has to be done in that area to make sure that ultimately we have a self-relying African continent that does not, depend on crumbs from the table of the master.
Hey, yeah, no, thanks for the explanation, Prof. But another related question is that there's seemingly a gulf between African intellectuals and then those that are in power politically. What causes that? One would have thought the government would seek the proximity of the thinking capacity that resides within academia. Why is it that the more intellectual is, the more disqualified you become to run an African state?
Yeah, well, another good question, but because a quick answer would be because the leader or the African leader in this context, it's afraid of handing over power or soliciting the help of the intellectual, simply because we, in this academic world, we are truth-seeking. It's very rare to come across a professor who has embezzled state funds. I don't know, but it's very rare, because most of us, we don't think about material acquisition. People who think that professors are wealthy, they are lying to themselves. We are only wealthy in terms of the knowledge that we produce out there, and leaders in most instances do not need people who have the foresight. They need people who can be gullible, can be used and dumped on the spur of the moment. So this is what creates the gulf. The leader in the South African context, a political leader, may not want to meddle themselves with such friendships, because intellectuals are very hard to convince when it comes to money and so on. But when it comes to facts, yes, we are easily convinced, because we are seeking light, we are seeking truth. Now, having said that, I know that if you look at the African National Congress and its history, we have some people who were more of intellectuals, Tambo, Sisulu, and some who even won some Nobel Prizes. So it's that era is long gone now. It has been replaced by populism. It has been replaced by people who would like to get rich quick, and materialism and belly politics and malfeasance and you name it. So now, if you have such a class of leaders who really don't care about people. They care about money. It's difficult to have that class to say, Professor Mapaya, come into our fold and show us the way, because you have read so many policies on good governance. You probably may help us. But lo and behold, those people are shunned because they know the truth, and our politicians may know the truth, but they don't seek the truth. That's a difference. That's what creates a barrier between intellectuals in this country and probably in Africa as a whole. And you end up having professors holed up in some ivory towers like universities, just writing articles and books which do not have any semblance or any bearing to the livelihood of the man in the street. That is a disjuncture that I'm seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, this leads me to another question which has been troubling me. Universities by their nature, more especially in South Africa, are very Eurocentric.
Yes.
The curriculum, the symbols that we promote or we cherish are all European cultural symbols. And yet we have African scholars occupying the highest echelons in those institutions. What is it that pacify Africans so much so that they don't see the need to mainstream African culture within these institutions?
Yeah, another brilliant question, and probably that the reason lies in the fact that we are presently seeing emerging student movements that are grappling with issues of neocolonialism and decolonization of curricula and so on and so forth. It's long overdue, but it's still accepted and relevant that we have such movements taking root. Now, why am I saying this? We have inherited universities, or maybe let me start with education, which is more Eurocentric and only fulfilling the needs of Europe as our colonial master. So now part of what I was studying for my PhD was looking at a decolonized curriculum. And as I've alluded to, looking at how Cuba went about with its curriculum, and that is why you have a lot of Cuban doctors who are more than readily available to give free assistance to developing countries by way of sending their doctors out there to help. And I know in South Africa we've had a lot of Cuban doctors, and many of them volunteered to come and help us for free. And yet you have a Eurocentric South African doctor who, upon finishing his degree in medicine, the first thing he needs is a very plush clinic, and which is isolated from the ethos and pathos of our people's daily lives, and would charge you an arm and a leg for your consultation. And many of them would even aspire to go to Britain or some European countries to go and practice medicine. We have seen it with our nurses who are running en masse to Canada, to Britain, just to go and run some nursing centers there and make money, a quick buck, so to say. But now that shows you how colonized our education system is. We have seen also how our young ones in the streets would battle to talk in good English, through their nasal tones to emulate a white man who speaks. And the more you emulate him, the better. The more you think you have arrived in terms of, Eurocentricity. So that also
interesting.
Yes.
Interestingly, Prof. Sorry to interrupt. The more you speak that kind of English, is the more you are employable within the media spaces. I'm not sure if you are aware of that.
Yeah, I've seen some of them, and God bless them. I've seen some of them who are at pains trying to even sharpen their tones to sound white, but because that is what the marketplace needs. If your tone, your color tone is almost like yours and mine, you may be thought of as the last person to be employed. But if you are lighter and so on, but then that tells a lot about what you have just alluded to. Our education is colonized, and we have done a great disservice to our people in 1994 by not looking at what decolonized education is all about. But simply because people were just merely non-racialists, they did not adopt Kwame Nkrumah's thinking. They did not adopt Bantu Biko's thinking. They thought if they adopted the Black consciousness way of thinking, it's abdicating on non-racialism, it's abdicating on the Freedom Charter, it's abdicating on the fellow white comrade. Whereas the picture was bigger than that. If you started, if maybe the ruling class at that time, after winning the first elections, radically changed the educational system, and that would cascade down to universities, which would in turn be decolonized, and the curriculum would be more Afrocentric. Why Afrocentric? By teaching African languages, by making sure that our culture is accepted, because we are in Africa, not in Europe. Our culture can be accepted by our people, but it's not the case. You have all the subjects being taught in English, first of all, and language encapsulates a culture of a people, isn't it? So if you know English more, then it means you are just a little Englishman in a sea full of black, people. And you think you are more educated when you are actually alienated from the daily existence of your people. That is what Black consciousness talks about. That is what Pan-Africanism talks about. And I'm so happy that most of our African scholars have come to realize this, and even our African students have really started to shake up the ivory towers, which are our universities today.
Yeah. Well, you promised to come back to your activism. I'm not sure whether you'd want to shed some light before I ask you the last two questions, or maybe I should pose the next one because it's closely related with what you've been addressing. As an African philosopher, what does this continent need to do to set itself on a correct path of greatness, because this continent is really great in all respects.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that is true. Well, and many African countries are on the mending. They are on a trajectory that is very commendable.
Yeah.
You look at Rwanda, what the president there is doing, it's quite amazing. You may not even think that at some stage we have what we call the Hutu and Tutsi conflict, and now it's on its trajectory. That is commendable. You look at other countries too, but the rest of Africa, you have internecine warfares that are going on in Somalia, in Eritrea, and that really takes the creativity of the African mind. But you will also realize that those wars are actually externally funded. If you ask yourself, where does Somalia get its sophisticated weaponry? It's not only ideological or based on religion, but there are some Western countries that are busy pumping in weaponry to make sure that our African continent doesn't know peace, because it is the lack of peace that makes colonialism and imperialism and neocolonialism to thrive by siphoning our wealth and minerals and so on and so forth. So that is one angle. The other angle is that Africa needs new leaders who are very much different from the kind of leadership that was deployed by all these Western powers. Leaders who are not selfish, leaders who are having the passion of Africa to develop at heart. Probably we can go somewhere at a faster pace. In South Africa, you can see the crop of leadership that we have. I don't think, unfortunately, they have a lot of money. They can get membership. They can, because our people can be so gullible also, that if you have a few millions, you can buy them, and close their minds from thinking very critically about their existential material condition. It's very rare to get that kind of breed of people. So that's what Africa needs, a new crop of leadership that is not selfish, that looks beyond the self and engage, the continent as a whole. So we can prosper if we do that. But the road is thorny because you still have vultures out there that are hell-bent on destroying you if you want to make sure that Africa is the Africa that we all aspire, to.
Now, how do we get rid of, or how do we name and shame, or is there a way of making sure that those that are funding wars within the country are shamed so that this practice come to an end somehow? What is the Africa Union doing about this?
Yeah, well, somebody was talking about the relevance of, is AU, the relevance of African Union, and some of us are very much saddened by the fact that it's just a toothless organization. But toothless because maybe 90% of its leadership is controlled from from outside. There is nothing. For instance, the war in Somalia, it needs the intervention of the African Union. The situation in Zimbabwe, which really burdens South Africa somehow, needs the intervention of African Union. At least we can cry and say NATO is imperialistic, but you have countries that are standing, for themselves when it comes to betterifying for lack of a better word, or improving the lot of their countries. But the African Union that we have, I'm seeing a toothless dog that barks every now and then, but runs back into its shelter when the real enemy comes. So that's what has become our African Union. Nothing fundamental is addressed. And I think Julius Malema has also made that point, that we need a strong African Union that can stand for Africa, to make sure that the programs and the resolutions and policies that they are taking, member states are taking every now and then, are fully implemented. We have good programs and policies. It's only the implementation part that is really lacking in this continent, Prof.
Yeah, I was appalled really to see the role Africa, or the non-responsiveness of African Union to the killing of Muammar Gaddafi. That was
Yes.
the episode. Yeah, Prof.
That's true.
Yeah, do you want to go back to a point that you wanted to expand on regarding your activism?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Prof. Well, I think I became a political activist, by mistake. I don't know, but because of the influence I got earlier, I talked about my brother. I talked about Ntate Mangena, and some of the leaders who really shaped my thinking. I became highly active when I was at high school. I think the first march that I participated in was the march against Bantu education when I was at Gojela High School. And this was somewhere in 1979, or I think 1978, 79. And most of the organizers of the march were arrested. I managed to escape. Now, that's where I first grinded my political teeth to understand really that the country is divided, first of all, and Black people were staying in townships and mud houses and shanty towns. And there was a beautiful town nearby called Mukopane. We could only go there and work for Vas van Vieren for a pittance, maybe 50 cents for 2 days, just to eke out a living. So those are some of the stark contradictions that I saw and made me to become a political activist. Now, when I went to college for my teacher's diploma, I was a little bit older then, and I became a member of the Azanian People's Students Movement, Azanian Students Movement, and also Azanian People's Organization. Well, there was a political lull at that time. Maybe I didn't have any choice but to join what was there, which was the Azanian People's Organization and the Black Consciousness Movement. So I participated in many consumer boycotts, and we boycotted white-owned shops in Mukopane and actually in the whole of Limpopo. The ideal here was to liberate the country, and that's what made me a political activist. Now, moving on to other areas, when I finished my teacher's diploma, I became a teacher. I taught for like 2 years. And then we intensified our struggle for liberation. I remember having to, campaign from village to village, organizing for the launch of many Azapo branches, and we took the struggle to a higher level, where we actually started to even engage with the Azanian National Liberation Army, and we could send people abroad for military training so that they can come back into the country to fight the enemy on an equal footing. Remember that the South African Defence Force was fierce and
it was the main machine.
It was the main machine, yeah. So to countenance that, you needed something which was stronger, and that's why we ended up training people. We ended up at that time. I think there was also Umkhonto we Sizwe, there was also APLA in the country, but because of the clarity that I saw within the Black consciousness movement, in as far as waging a revolutionary war is concerned, we thought maybe there were some missing gaps in as far as the tactics of Umkhonto we Sizwe and APLA were concerned.
Okay.
So that is why we started training other people to go for training in as far as Libya and other countries which were more receptive. Unfortunately, this was war, and I was arrested on many occasions. I was detained. The last time I was detained was in April, I think the 5th of April, 1985, where we had an illegal meeting, so to say, in Makweleren Township. We were surrounded by the police and the army and arrested and taken to the nearby police station where we were tortured. And unfortunately, in that process, in that ordeal, one of my comrades, Comrade Makompo Kutumela, died. And I think then I lost sight on my left eye because some policeman just jumped and landed on my left eye with his heavy boots. All I heard was a loud bang in my skull. And the next thing I saw darkness, and that was it. That's a long time ago. But then even before I could be healed, I was sent to Nelstrom prison, where I served close to 3 years under the state of emergency. So I came back and continued with my activism. But then because the system wanted to eliminate me, that's when I ran back to the US. Remember, I went there for 8 months and then went back to the US to sort of, you call it exile. And I came back in 2006. I'm just hurriedly talking about those. Each and every epoch meant pain, sorrow, darkness, frustration, and staying abroad for a long time. You become nostalgic sometimes and you think about your people back home, and it was not easy, but at least I managed to survive and attain my master's and PhD abroad. So in a nutshell, that's my other side of life, Prof.
Yeah, one of my passion, actually, I'm going to make it a project, is to encourage people to write autobiographies.
I see.
Yeah, our people don't write, and I can sense the richness of your experience, that if it were in a form of a book, it will be a spellbound kind of a read. I'm sure, speaking to a professor, that is something in the pipeline. An autobiography.
Sure. With your encouragement, I will do that. I will certainly do that. And recently, the NPA and the Hawks are interested in reviving some of the cases. I know that the Bantu Biko case is about to be revived, and the other one where we were tortured, like I've just alluded to. The Hawks visited me on campus to write a sworn statement as to what transpired. So there is some interest from the government to make sure that such stories are told. And maybe, yes, you are right, we will end up piecing together some of this information. I'm not a fond person of because I view it as self-aggrandizement sometimes, and you write about yourself and all that. But if this is coupled with the experiences of our people, because I was not alone, it would be worthwhile.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I don't know, but with your help, maybe we can do something.
Yeah, well, I'm going to challenge you because you have to put something on the table. So
Yeah.
we can't keep blaming the system to say there's no material. We can't piece together a cogent history because people haven't written.
Yeah.
Yeah, even from a personal, these things that we read about, people have written even from a personal perspective. And then it later became canon, which was then shoved down our throats. So I would rather be exposed to Thobejane's story than a story from somewhere about someone who was sailing to some other place. Yeah, but Prof, thank you so much. I want to ask whether there's a lighter side to his existence. Do you like sports? What activities do you involve yourself in? Or are you a prophet in the making?
Well, I think the professor has actually intensified my love for jazz. And I know we have co-authored an article some time back with Dr. Malinga. So that, basically when I listen to jazz, it makes me to be more creative. I can write more. I don't know what really makes my nerves to be more creative when I listen to a good music, but it unleashes that creativity within me. That's my my hobby, listening to music. Of course, I once in a while exercise, and so because we are getting old, I do have some time when I exercise. And of course, writing is also, it can become a very good hobby. Besides that, I don't know what else, but during weekends, there are some rallies and conferences which I'm invited to, maybe to give keynote addresses here and there. I have made that a hobby too. But what I enjoy even most is to listen to just some good jazz from Professor Mapaya's old music. I don't know if you are still producing, but that's what makes my day, Prof.
Okay.
Yeah.
Prof, it has been such an honor and really a privilege to sit, I think it's over an hour with you, engaged on a focused discussion of this nature. And thank you so much for being so unselfish. You've allowed us into your thinking the way you see our condition as African people. And thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you very much, Prof, for having me. And this was very enlightening. Sometimes you need colleagues to ask very heavy questions so that you can dig deeper into yourself, so you can understand perspectives even better. Thank you, and thanks for your program.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.